What's up YouTube? Welcome to today's video where I'm going to go over the ranking personally for me of all of the Uber bosses. Now in the past week or so, I have been doing a lot of Ubers pretty much just because I don't really know what else to do in the game. Kind of tired of the loot goblin meta. Maybe I'll try it a little bit more. But at this point, I'm pretty much just trying to get better at the bosses and pretty much trying to push the limit of what is possible to do the Uber bosses. Now currently I am doing a 50 Chaos White Wind Dagger Challenge. Now, as you can see here, this is Uber Eater of Worlds, and some of the... Okay, come on. Like, the boss is just unfair. Like Uber Eater of Worlds is definitely going to be number one, right? Little do you know. Now, as you can see here, I'm pretty much trying out all of the bosses on as low of a budget as possible, kind of inspired by Jung Rowan. And it's kind of cool, but I'm trying it out without using some seismic trap or whatever he was using. But basically, I wanted to do a quick little ranking of what I thought. Probably not that quick, but also to help out people to understand what bosses they can try. I know Quinn has actually started to do some Ubers in hardcore, and you'll see in this list that he actually does attempt one of the easiest Uber bosses first. And a lot of people kind of wonder what exactly is different about the Ubers, and I'm going to go over a little bit of the key differences and give you some tips. Now, as I said, I've been trying to do the Uber bosses because I kind of got tired of the loot goblin meta. Now, I am doing it mainly on builds with pretty low DPS and pretty low tankiness. So I'm not playing a Quinn God tier Juggernaut. I'm not playing an Eye of Winter Miner that just one-shots the boss. I'm playing kind of like a build that has mediocre damage and that will probably die to most of the mechanics. So you actually have to play pretty well. Now, I did try this on Melee. I've also played this on Winter Orb. I've also played this on Spectral Helix. I've also played this on Lightning Strike. So I played it on pretty much every single playstyle imaginable, and this is my personal ranking of what I think is the hardest Uber bosses from easiest to hardest. So first off, we have Uber Shaper, and this is, in my opinion, by far one of the easiest Uber bosses, as you can see here. This is pretty much me fighting it. Now, as you can see, Uber Shaper is pretty much kind of easy because there's not really that much stuff going on in the screen. Now, Clarity is a huge portion of it, and they do this bullet hell phase that doesn't exist on normal mode, and a lot of Shaper's projectiles are LMP'd. Now, every single time you get hit by one of the purple balls, you actually end up taking more damage because it penetrates you. So a lot of times max res can only take you so far, and a Sapphire Flash is very, very important. So you can see right here, this is pretty much, well, you actually can't see it, but you can see here right here, this is why I'm actually running 5 life flasks. Oh my goodness, what am I even doing? Why am I running 5 life flasks? Well, that's a little bit for another video, but life flasks are OP. So a lot of the times on Uber Shaper, you're pretty much trying to manage the degen puddles on the ground. You want to stack it up as nicely as possible. You want to try to make sure you have some cold resist or max cold res. It does help out. And you want to use the Sapphire Flash during the bullet hell phase. Now, the only thing that can kill you, as I said before, is the slam, and pretty much the beam can also kill you, and having any sort of reduced damage over time, like Leafy Shade, will make stacking the puddles a lot easier, and it will generally make your life a lot easier when you take less damage over time. Oh my goodness, what did I just come back to? What in the world is this? Okay, so I was like looking up something, and yeah, that's what happens when you leave your game on for a while inside of Maven. But I just wanted to show you, Leafy Shade right here is incredibly important. And you will see this is probably one of the most important nodes in the game for Uber bosses and will be a great lifesaver. However, Uber Shaper is incredibly simple. People are kind of used to the Shaper mechanics over time. Only real thing is the LMP and then the bullet hell phase that you do have to go through. Now, next up, you have Uber Elder. Now, Uber Elder is kind of actually a surprisingly annoying fight depending on your build. And this is a very, very build-dependent fight, purely because Shaper actually teleports around a lot. So if you play a build that your damage is pre-stacked somewhere, and you also see these squids that pop out, and you have to focus on killing it. Now, the reason behind that is if you don't kill the squids, you will actually pretty much just die because it'll cover the arena with black degen on the ground, and sooner or later, your arena will just become a mess. So you want to try to drop the puddles, or if you're a pro, you can try to infinitely kite the puddles and try to make it so that no puddles are actually available on the ground. Now you can see right here, this fight is fun because you get to fight the boss a lot. There's no invulnerability boss phases. You're always fighting an actual mob instead of the arena. like some of the other bosses that we'll be looking at. Now right there, you can see I messed up. I didn't actually intend to drop that puddle on the ground. But this is a fight that does take a little bit of a lot of mechanical skill. However, a lot of people are pretty used to this fight in general because they have done Uber Elder so much. And the only thing that's really different is the fact that Elder and Shaper now have LMP. And also the fact that Shaper teleport goes into the middle and does another bullet hell phase. However, this bullet hell phase isn't too dangerous. You still have to take care of the squids. Now, the one thing I had the most trouble with was a lot of times I would worry too much about the squids and pretty much just stand still and die. Now, a lot of times for the damage that you're taking is definitely going to be Elder shooting you with the icicle projectile. So when you stand still a lot of time, and this is the case for almost every single boss fight in PoE, is that standing still and not orb walking is literally a fast way to die. So you can see here I'm prioritizing the squid, and since I'm standing still, I actually got hit by the Elder projectile and the Shaper laser beam. So that's just something to keep in mind, in that you have to watch out for pretty much a bunch of attacks. But this is definitely a fight that I feel like is incredibly well designed. It feels rewarding to play, and everything just feels good. Except for the one thing, which is the Elder slowing your action speed down, but that's not too bad for how fun this fight is to play. I could do this fight all day, and I would always feel like I'm getting better at it. Now, if you get really good at the fight, you could pretty much never put down a degen puddle on the ground. And at that point, you are probably one of the best players in the world, right? But later on, you do have to watch out for the Shaper and Elder Slam. I think the Elder Slam actually comes out at the latter stages of the fight. And as I said before, this fight is incredibly build reliant. Some builds will instantly destroy the fight. If your build has no ramp damage and it doesn't matter how much the bosses move around, Uber Elder is extremely easy. And if your build has good recovery, it's also a pretty easy fight. So that's why it's number 5 on the list. It's definitely harder than Uber Shaper, but I don't think it's as hard as some of the other fights coming up. So next up, we have Uber Maven. Now, Uber Maven is kind of a nightmare. Now, this is just to give you some perspective on what it's actually like in order to play in Softcore. So when you play on Softcore, a lot of times you just kill the bosses instantly and you never really even notice what the boss mechanic does. So in Uber Maven, there is a mechanic that it does not exist where the beams come out. So it does this crisscross beam pattern. And if you actually get hit by that crisscross beam pattern, you get a debuff on you called Maven's Punishment. Just like if you run into these beams right here. So if you run into these beams right here, you get the debuff. And when you have that debuff on you, you will be unable to recover life. Now, before this was not really that big of an issue, but in the recent patch, or the latest patch, they made it so that life recovery from flash does not work. And also, also life gain on hit. So you can see right there, I ran into the beam and I have this debuff on myself, and that's just poor play. So at this point, you're pretty much dead if you get hit by anything, because you can't recover it. I have 5 life flasks. You can't see it, but I still can't recover my life. So you pretty much have to dodge it all and then wait out the 10 seconds. And this is actually incredibly punishing, especially if you are not used to this, because usually when I play this fight, I would literally just get hit by that beam, that crisscross beam, because it did like almost no damage. Now, this fight can also be very difficult if you get a bad set of bosses. Now, this fight is pretty much more or less identical, but there is a little thing right here. So let's go showcase it during the phase. So this is the brain phase, nothing really different. And after you kill the brain, you can see when he does the memory game, you have to fight 2 bosses. So you have to kind of multitask. You have to do the memory phase, and you also have to kill off these bosses. So this is definitely a fight that might test how much attention span you have and how good your memory is while under pressure. Now, some people might fail it, but that's pretty much it. And then after that, you're home free. Watch out for these laser beams. Now, these laser beams are pretty much the main reason you will die. And these degen puddles also last the whole time. So make sure you place it all in the middle or all in the same spot. So this fight definitely gets a lot easier when you have damage, because you'll pretty much kill the bosses instantly and you don't even need to worry about much of the boss abilities. Now, one thing I want to bring up is that this fight actually has horrific visual clarity for the memory game, and I don't really know why the color palette looks so bad. Now, this is something here. This is the fire projectile ability that Uber Maven does, and it's nice to know that this thing actually penetrates 30% of your fire res. So a lot of these abilities actually penetrates resist. So you can see here the Shaper bullet hell phase penetrates 25% cold res. So that's why you need to watch out. You can't just tank it all just because you think you have 90% res. A lot of times, a lot of abilities in PoE actually penetrate your resist, making your resist a lot less effective. So next up, we have Uber Eater of Worlds. Now, this guy is a monster. Just look how scary he looks, right? This guy has it all. Now, he's extremely hard compared to the normal version, and this is pretty much due to the sheer amount of damage this boss does. Pretty much when you play this boss, every single thing can one-shot you. It just feels like unless you're playing like an Aegis Aurora build that has like maximum defenses, you will just get owned by the boss. So you can see here, Hunger. He also has a larger AoE, so you have to watch out. Oh my goodness, this is when I was trying out Frostblades. And yeah, there's a reason why people don't play Frostblades. So after I tried out Frostblades a little bit, so you have this part, the intermission phase, where you have to do it. And then there's more tentacles that come out that doesn't exist in the normal phase. And if you haven't really done that part before, it's going to be very difficult. And he always does this starfish tentacle pattern after he does the intermission phase. So you really have to watch out for it. And then there's more tentacles that spawn, and the tentacles do one-shot you unless your build is actually pretty tanky. And I actually killed this boss pretty fast. Or did I actually die a lot? So this thing right here, you can see you have to run around in circles. And then these tentacles that spawn, unless you're having like some high evasion build, you will get killed pretty fast. And then this beam, you have to dodge through him or run around in a circle around him. So there's just so many things you have to watch out for, so that you don't get one-shotted. And then you have these balls that slow down your movement speed. But this fight is interesting in the fact that you do feel like you get a lot better at doing it. You keep doing the fight, you will feel like you're getting better at it, and you can do it with almost no gear. And that's something that I really enjoyed about this fight. Every death felt pretty fair. Like when I died to the laser beam, I felt like, oh yeah, I got hit by it. If I hit by the tentacle, it's like, yeah, I was pretty impatient. And yeah, like right there, I stopped right a split second. Now I'm waiting for the crisscross starfish pattern, and I don't know why it didn't come out. But as you can see here, this is definitely a fight of patience. You can do this fight on very low damage. Just ask Quinn about it. I think he took 30 minutes to do the fight, and I just messed up there, went the wrong way, tried to dash through, didn't have enough distance on it. Now, as I said, all of the damage is lightning, so your Topaz Flask is vital. Now, the main thing I can advise you is never, ever stand still. The tentacles will literally collapse on you and kill you. And just keep practicing the fight. The intermission phase is probably the biggest difference. And you have to make sure you're patient. You don't want your stacks to get too high. And when we're talking about stacks, we're talking about, let's go see. So when you're in this circle, you see how this thing is just a stack? So that's how much extra damage you will be taking. So if you get like 50 stacks on you, it doesn't matter if you have the tankiest character in the world, you are probably going to die. Now, next up, we have a lot of people really despise this fight, myself included, and Uber Searing Exarch. You will notice now, I mean, you pretty much already know what the number one boss will be. These two fights I put at the top purely because the arena degen is really annoying to deal with, and because both these fights actually have a kind of a soft enrage. Now, Uber Searing Exarch is not really that different. As usual, the boss has some LMP thing to it for Annihilation, but the boss also has a tiny bit of a DPS check with the Minotaur. Now, the Minotaur is incredibly annoying, let's just say. So the Minotaur, oh my goodness, look at this. So many balls everywhere. So you have to get pretty good at the ball phase. Now, only tip I have is keep calm. Don't panic. Just look for the openings and blink diagonals. Now, I'll show you what I mean by diagonals in a little bit. So if you can't kill this Minotaur fast enough, say you have bad damage, sooner or later, you're going to get overwhelmed. And the Minotaurs actually do pretty much always one-shot you if you get hit by that triple attack, right? If you get hit by that overhead slam, you'll get one-shotted. Now, the Annihilation is really dangerous. Now, a lot of these fights are just very different from their normal versions. Like Shaper and Uber Elder are not that different. But this fight is completely different because you just take so much more damage from the abilities, and you can't just face tank it, and you have to run around a lot. Now, this fight is incredibly frustrating at the end, purely because, what's it called? There's just so much degen on the ground. If you run over these grates, you actually get your fire resist reduced, and you also get your fire resist. You get your fire resist reduced, and you also get a lower cooldown on your flame dash, which makes the fight even harder. And this is definitely a fight you want to always keep trying, and you will keep getting better. the ball phase is something that just needs a lot of attempts. And that's a lot of things about PoE. A lot of the boss fights are learnable, but it just costs so much to get into and get better at the fight. Like, I'm literally spending 100+ divines learning these fights on a character with low stats. And again, I do have to say that patience is probably key for this fight. You don't want to greed too much. You don't want to... Like, greed is the thing that gets you killed in PoE. And it's, like, look at that. I try to greed a little bit. Look at that. As soon as I say something about greed, it happens in the actual video. So avoid the grades, like I said. They will lower your fire res, reduce your flame dash cooldown, and make sure to blink diagonals if you really get into trouble. So what do I mean by that? So let's see if we can actually see a ball face coming up. So you can see here, right? The ball face, when the balls come at you, you have this diagonal right here you can blink. So when there's like when you feel like you're trapped, you can blink the diagonal, or you can blink over short distances. A lot of people die because they blink too far, or they don't actually look at where their mouse cursor is. And I've seen that a lot. Like, you blink right on top of a ball, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Make sure your cursor is not on top of a ball, even though you think the general direction is safe. And that's probably the #1 tip I can personally give you for Uber Series XR. Now, next up, we have my favorite fight of all time, Psych. And it is Uber Sirus. Now, Uber Sirus is the only boss I haven't killed yet on my 50 Chaos character. And it's not for a lack of trying. This boss is just a monster. Like, let me just say, this guy is the epitome of unfairness for a melee build. And if you have bad damage, now the first few phases aren't too bad. It spawns a storm in the center. Not too bad. You just go on with your business, and it's really the last phase where everything falls apart. So let's go take a look at this last phase. Now, this is the last fight of the night. And I'll probably try it again today on stream, and I'll let you know in the next video if we actually complete this challenge, because, yeah, so this is the last phase. He has a lot of HP to go through, and this fight definitely is a lot easier if you have a lot of damage, and we'll go over that in a little bit, what I mean by DPS. Now, here that you can see there's very limited amounts of time to dodge, and here you can dodge that, and then it will do a die beam following it. And then he splits into clones. This is a pretty good time to get your damage out. Now, something to know is you should always try to keep Sirus on your screen. You don't want him to die beam you off screen so that you can't react. Now, the biggest problem with this is you need quite a few movement skills in order to blink over the beam. So make sure you have a lot of flame dash cooldown recovery. The maze is also comes out a little bit faster in Uber form, so you have to watch out for that. Now here, you have to dodge that, and you dodge it, and then he's going to do a dive. Oh wait, he does a corridor. Now, corridor is kind of annoying because he can have a lot of degen puddles on you. Now, you might be wondering, this fight doesn't look so bad, so what is actually wrong with it? Well, as you can see here, Sirus still has over 50% of his life, and the arena is starting to have a lot of these puddles on the ground. Now, that's just not a good thing. So, sooner or later, you can see there's very little space to run, and these puddles are the same thing as the Maven puddles, where if you run over the puddles, you actually can't get any life recovery, so that's something they recently buffed. Now, look at that. Sirus is literally being a bully standing in the middle of all of these beams. Now, the fight's kind of going well. I feel like I'm not playing that badly, but I just don't have that much damage uptime on him. And here, I probably die because I dash into something, right? It's okay. It's looking good still. So you can see here, there's definitely a DPS problem. I can't really find where he is. And, oh no, I got hit by the beam. I'm still alive. Oh, I'm trying to make it out, and I died. So now is where it gets really bad. When you die, it's really hard to come back into the fight. And by the end of the fight, you will see that the entire arena is starting to get covered by stuff. And it's just a complete clusterfuck of a fight. And at a certain point, you just have to give up. I'm trying to find Sirus before he die beam me off screen. And there's just so much degen everywhere. And I just don't know how to get to him safely. You can see some of these effects don't even render in properly. And then, look, the entire maze is full of degens. There's degens on the exit. It's literally very, very difficult. And he just off-screen die beams me again. And this is with Leafy Shade too. So like I said, this fight is extremely difficult if you're playing melee and you have low damage. Incredibly hard to see what's going on. The color palette makes it very, very difficult. If your skill has any sort of effects, it makes it even worse. It's probably the only fight that I've done that actually has a pretty soft or hardened rage, however you want to say it, or it's a softened rage. Because the floor will pretty much be entirely covered with puddles, and if you're melee, you literally cannot melee the boss. Now, the best time for DPS is definitely during the corridor phase and when he splits into clones. And I do think the maze is extremely unfair sometimes if there's just degen puddles everywhere. You're pretty much running through stuff where you can't even use your life flash to gain recovery. And this is something I saw on Reddit recently. Why does most of the danger or most of the new bosses come from fighting the arena? And he mentions Sirus specifically. Now, Uber Sirus is by far the hardest fight. And I don't really think that's arguable unless your character is incredibly high in DPS. Now, overall, you might be saying I'm missing a Uber. I didn't include Cortex because it's really too varying in its damage. For instance, you could get a Cortex like this, which would probably put it at the top of the list. If you get like extra fizz damage as fire or elemental damage, and then you get an elemental pen mod, and then you get a more monster life mod, the Cortex is probably the hardest one on the list, right? So I don't really like Uber Cortex because the difficulty is so varied. That's why people didn't really include it in the Gauntlet, because every single fight is not equal. Now, these difficulty rankings do change immensely depending on your DPS and tankiness. I pretty much ranked this in terms of a character that didn't have like absurd DPS and a character that wasn't a Giga Tank Transcendence character that could tank everything. So this is pretty much a normal character. It gets one-shotted if you get hit by a die beam, or not the die beam. If you get hit by the Eater of Worlds beam, it dies if you run into like 2 or 3 balls, and it dies if you run into too many degen puddles. So this is a pretty accurate ranking in my opinion if your build is not like a god. Now, I do think on softcore, this is a very important distinction, is that damage is better than everything. And being stuck in no man's land is the worst. You don't want a build that has mediocre damage and mediocre tankiness. You want a build that is super, super tanky that can never die. Or you want a build that does a billion damage, or does a lot of damage. A lot of the intermission phases can pretty much be skipped through portals, like the Searing XR ball phase. You can skip it through a portal. And as soon as you come back, you chunk the boss down. You get to the next ball phase. You use the portal. And portals are pretty much the best defense. And Chris did give us 6 of them. Now, even on Uber Elder, it's extremely, extremely easy if you have like really high DPS, because you won't have to deal with that many squids, and you don't have to deal with that many, puddles to manage. And it's just incredibly, incredibly good to have high damage. Now, I do hope that GGG has some better boss design planned for PoE 2. I am kind of disappointed there was no Kalandra endgame boss fight. And I do wish that their choice of color palettes is a little bit better. Like black on red on this like blackish gray surface is just terrible. Maven is the same exact way. Like what happened to like arenas that look like this? Clear, distinct colors. Not trying to fool me with the color palette and rendering certain graphics in. And I do think that's something that they can potentially improve on in the future, because I do like even the Searing Exarch is kind of bad. Like sometimes you can get a little grate that spawns underneath you and you can't even see what's going on. And it's just the color palette that they're choosing. I really hope that they try to make it more clear. But let me know down in the comments below which is your favorite Uber boss, or what you think is the hardest Uber boss for you personally. This is just my opinion, and this is a very, very specific ranking. But thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you find more Exalted Orbs, Divine Orbs, and Mage Bloods, and Hate Forges than me. And see you next time. Bye!